This is One-on-One with Alex Kirsch Podcast, where I bring on one guest to talk about specific topics, whether they're political, social, economic, criminal, scientific, sports, or even entertainment. There are no tricks, and everything here is in good faith. Today's guest is a recurring guest, but I've reached out to him to talk about two specific topics. He is the host of the Redline Podcast, one of the best geopolitical podcasts out there, if I might say so myself. Let's welcome back to the Alex Kirsch Project, Michael Hilliard.
It's always a pleasure, and you're always far too kind to me. Every time.
It's a great podcast, though. I mean, I just listened to the most recent episode talking about the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But please go ahead and give yourself another introduction for those that are not aware of you.
My name is Michael Hilliard. I host the Redline, and I am also an analyst with a degree in economics, but mostly focusing on the armed forces of Central Asia and the former Soviet Union states. So if it ends in Stan, I've probably spent some time in it and done a bit of work on it. So it's a very niche bunch of knowledge base.
And this is actually 100% true. He did tell me that at one point he actually took a date to Uzbekistan in the middle of a war conflict. It's like, okay.
Yeah, my now wife has been to that country with me before, so no idea why she decided to stay with me after that one. But she has terrible taste. I'll put it that way.
You're far too hard on yourself, good sir. So, but yeah, if you haven't given it a chance to check it out, I've actually left a link in the description below. If you haven't checked out that podcast, it's really good. He brings on 3 geopolitical experts for that region. For example, if he's going to talk about the Sudan, he'll bring on 3 experts that have actually specifically dealt with Sudan. It's not Billy Bob sitting in his kitchen that read a blog and then he's going to give an expert opinion on it. No, these are actual legitimate experts. And this is like, he's my go-to when it comes down to geopolitics. So that's the reason why I definitely trust him above all else. So, but we weren't just going to talk about geopolitics today. We've got 2 topics to come up here because I reached out to him a while back. Say, do you know anybody that could possibly weigh in on the topics of isolationism for the United States specifically and foreign aid, right? Because if anybody's I've known that's talked to foreign aid, Michael is definitely the guy to talk to about it, right? Now, why did I talk about isolationism? Well, first things first, he's based on Australia. That country is an ally of ours. Any economic impact that might happen in the United States directly affects what happens to Australia and so on and so forth. If something bad happens to Australia, it can affect us as well. People have no idea just how connected we really are in this world. So we're going to start off with isolationism. Now, there's a reason why, excuse me, I came down with a cold, so I'm still recovering from it. The reason why I brought this up is because about 2 weeks ago, Destiny and Owen Shroyer had a debate. Now, I'm going to post a video link.
I want to know you guys' opinion when Trump was president, when he tried to isolate America on a global scale from groups like NATO and try to go closer to countries like Russia or China.
Autarky is basically this idea that your country can be its own country and not rely on the rest of the world for anything is stupid. It's subversive to the concept of America, the idea that we are a global trading partner, that we can ensure global peace and prosperity through ensuring trading lanes, ensuring these giant multilateral trade agreements so that we can have access to other people's markets, so they can have access to our markets. You saw what happened when the Houthis started shooting missiles at ships. What happened? The United States showed up and they said, hey, no more of that, and they shut it down. And trade through the Suez Canal continued. We wouldn't be able to do that in an America supported by Trump or Trumples because they believe, somewhat naively, that we can just withdraw entirely from all of the global world markets and still be as good as we are now, that we wouldn't be able to rely on any of the manufacturing from any other country, we wouldn't have access to any of those markets in the way that we do now. Like, why would we want to take our country back so far? You know who tried stepping away from giant unified markets? It was the United Kingdom via Brexit. Their economy is not doing very good right now. So I don't know why that would be the model that you would try to emulate for a country who has built so much success off of so much cooperation with the rest of the world.
The concept for America is actually independence, okay? It's independence. So yes, we can be independence. And I think we learned a lot from this recent port strike where they just ended it a couple weeks ago. We learned that most of these ports are actually owned by foreign companies. That's a problem. We should own all of our ports. We should make money off of all of our ports, and maybe we wouldn't have this issue. But I think that there's a general attitude here. See, I think conservatives versus liberals, if you hear what he just said, conservatives believe we can. We believe in the American people. We believe in American companies. We believe we can manufacture and produce goods, just like we've done for years. We used to have manufacturing plants in all the inner cities, and a man could get a job and make a living wage for his family and buy a home. They've all shipped those overseas. We can bring those back. We have plenty of energy here in the United States. We have innovations in energy. We can go nuclear here. We don't need the world. It's true. But that's the leftist liberal attitude is, oh, we need everybody. You need everybody. You need government. You can't make it on your own. You can make it on your own. America can make it on its own.
Destiny gave the correct answer. That's the dumbest thing you could possibly ever do. But Owen's basically talking about like how, oh, isolationists, yes, we should become isolationists. We could definitely take care of ourselves. We have our own resources. So I'm going to play the dumb American and basically say, well, wait a second. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right into the question. So Michael, the United States right now is the mass exporter of oil as of right now. We are the leading exporter of oil right now. We are pumping millions of barrels per day. We have, lithium all over the place. I know because conspiracy theorists are out there saying that, they're controlling the hurricanes to go dig up the lithium in North Carolina. Yes, this is true. People are actually saying this crap. But we have our own resources, and we can actually build our own manufacturing. We can create jobs in this country. So why can't the United States just become an isolationist country?
Well, in short, if you want to have a seat at the table, if you want to be in the conversation where they are negotiating how the terms of trade work in the entire world, you have to be at the table to have that conversation. Britain itself is finding this exact problem at the moment after Brexit, of having massive trade problems, jobs going away, things are getting worse, things are becoming more expensive because they pulled away from, integration into the European Union. Going isolationist for the United States is, for foreign policy terms, we can go foreign policy or economics first, but for foreign policy terms, is a terrible, terrible, terrible decision. And what people don't tend to realize is, yes, at the very first thought, you might go, okay, well, pulling out, gives countries their own autonomy, but it actually just kind of hands power to other countries. I always the example I usually point to here is in Iraq, effectively, when the US pulled down to their positions in the Kurdish areas, the Russians occupied those positions so quickly that the Cokes in the fridge were still cold.
Syria.
Yeah. It would be Kurdish Syria. Sorry, my bad.
It's okay.
I've been awake all night with a sick baby, okay. So it's been fun. But yes, this is a massive problem for the United States. If they want to be isolationist, we haven't had a president who wants to do that in a very, very long time. That is going to make everything exponentially more chaotic for the next 4 years, because it won't be, you won't be the European Union moving into that power vacuum. It'll be other countries we probably don't want to be, calling the rules of the game at the table.
Well, here's the thing, though. We've got our own problems here in the United States. Why should we worry about what happens in other countries? Seriously. And obviously, I know that this is not the case, but I'm just playing the American that has no idea with what's going on in the world. But it's like, we've got our own problems here in the United States, and people will make these arguments that we have our own problems. We've got our own homeless. We've got our own homeless veterans. Our streets are a mess. Our infrastructure is, while it's getting better because of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we still have cities that are crumbling, and we still just need to fix our own problems here. So why should we just continue to, why can't we just cut ourselves off from the rest of the world and just focus upon ourselves?
Well, again, in context, what the Americans spend on foreign aid is about 0.2% of GDP. It's very small. And on top of that, foreign aid can be a bit weird on what actually constitutes foreign aid, because a lot of foreign aid spending by the US is building a better highway that goes from the US-run company mine to the US-run company port, which to me doesn't sound, it's not rice and it's not that kind of stuff. It's really just kind of helping a US company become more efficient with what they do. Now, again, I hear the claim of, okay, well, yes, we have people at home. Why can't we spend that money here? But that's only the one side of the equation. Right now, the US gets, if you look around, sitting in your room listening to this, everything you're probably listening to this on was made somewhere else, or is using parts or resources from somewhere else. And frankly, if you want to get everything made in the US or get everything, produced in the US, be prepared to spend 8, 9, 10 times as much which is only going to make all these consumption problems worse. I mean, yes, we have homeless, we have people who are homeless, but if the price of every single thing on the shelf goes up by 10 times, that's only going to make more homeless. It's not going to solve the problem. It's like trying to, it'd be almost like trying to get a haircut using chemo. It would solve no problem. It would almost solve the problem, go way too far, and cause a huge amount of other problems at the same time.
But, I keep on seeing us, fund all these wars. Why are we funding the Ukraine-Russia conflict? I mean, my goodness, we've got all these problems back here. I mean, why is this our problem? Why is Ukraine and Russia our problem exactly? Again, I'm playing the dumb American, just in case people are wondering.
So, effectively, the way the American consumption has gone up, and again, we live in a magical time in history where, again, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There are terrible things going on at the moment, but for consumption wise, you're buying a television that would be amazing just a few years ago. You're buying a ham sandwich that would cost, $1 billion. Actually, take it back just a second. A bit rambly this morning. I think the best place to start this is to start with an economics experiment that was done a few years ago. Effectively, what this guy did is he bought a ham sandwich from the shop and went, okay, how much is it going to cost to make this ham sandwich if I don't rely on anyone else and I just do it myself? I raise the pig, I raise the chickens, I get the eggs, I make the bread, I farm the lettuce, I do all the work myself. I am not going to trade with anybody. And it ends up actually costing about $1,400 to make this sandwich, because that's the beauty of trade, is you can take advantage of where it's cheaper to produce other things in other places, and it makes consumption cheaper. Now, the United States relies on, very integrated supply chains, whether it, people's jobs who rely on being able to export into Europe, or people's jobs who rely on getting components in from Taiwan and then manufacturing into something better in the United States, which will go to Mexico for a bit and then come back to the United States. These are all things that give Americans the standard of living they have. And if, frankly, we just let the world go to chaos, well, that actually takes that away. You now have to go make that ham sandwich yourself from everything at scratch, which is going to cost you way, way more. Why Ukraine is important particularly is if we don't solve the Ukraine problem, and Putin was to get away with this and change the borders, which is something we haven't done. We don't change borders by aggression since effectively 1945, apart from a few odd cases like Yugoslavia. We let that happen, it will give a giant green light to effectively Azerbaijan, Algeria, Morocco, China, Taiwan, possibly the Koreas if you want to go down that road. All of these countries now feel that they can change their borders via aggression. And that will not only freak markets out, will not only break a lot of the supply chains that effectively have made our consumption as cheap as it is at the moment, but will just cause much more chaos and problems down the road. In fact, as we've been through before in this program, because foreign policy is such a slow-moving beast, you don't kind of go make a decision, everything switches. You see, it's almost like driving a giant cruise ship. You make a decision today, it actually makes, it impacts about 3-4 years down the road. What the chaos we're seeing right now is quite often problems that we saw from the Trump administration, which are now starting to, creep back in and cause problems. With Israel as an example, when Trump recognized Jerusalem as the embassy, that obviously encourages one side to think that negotiations are no longer a viable option. I mean, this is again, very, very rambly this morning, but generally, if we do not solve crises like Ukraine for, frankly, a very little amount of money for the United States, we are only opening ourselves up to the ending. This is a globalized system of trade that, frankly, has made consumption so much cheaper these days.
Well, and this one actually is a genuine question, though, because I remember in 2020 when the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia was going on, I was like, there's a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan going on, because it wasn't really capturing nationwide news. I mean, it wasn't exactly grabbing at the headlines. There were some independent media outlets like yours as well that was actually covering this conflict. You actually had people on the ground discussing what was going on. But conflicts like that, do those actually have an impact on the global market, essentially? Do they actually have an impact? If a small conflict, or should I say small conflict, I mean, it's I think one of the guests talked about there was a city in Armenia that had a population of it was 50,000 people or something like that, and now it's 50 or something like that because of the war. I think I could have got those numbers wrong, But because the conflict like that, like it was like the entire population has either been killed or displaced essentially. So though conflicts like that actually have a drastic impact, and how does that like affect the United States essentially?
Absolutely. And there are always going to be blowbacks and run effects from every conflict. Now, Nagorno-Karabakh and the Armenia conflict is a little bit different because it's a bit of an oddity where it's technically all inside Armenia, or UN recognized Armenia, should I say? Oh, sorry, UN recognized Azerbaijan. But the war did blow eventually kind of into Armenia. It's a very long story. We probably won't get into that today. But even that effectively has changed all the trade dynamics of the Caucasus and the Middle East. And you watched today that even this instability, which again had been dormant for nearly 30 years, has made all pipeline infrastructure in the region avoid Armenia. That's had massive effects on the Armenian economy and a whole bunch of other places. If you look at, let's say, particularly things like migrant crisis, which is a very big story in the United States, a lot of these migrants were drawn or pushed into that situation by problems in Venezuela, the ratcheting of tensions, particularly during 2017 and the sanctions, problems in Haiti, problems with conflicts along their border or internal conflicts as well. You watch the Libyan civil war as another example, effectively, where that being it's a faraway place. Who's thought about Libya in a while? Not only sent shockwaves to the oil market and caused the European oil price to have problems, which again then just increased reliance on Russia for a while there, which has effects later on. But caused a lot of the migrant crises that then drove, a lot of the populist candidates into power in sort of the 2016 to 2018 period. Again, these are very kind of, you hit one problem here and you actually see the symptoms 3 years later or 4 years later. But conflicts have massive effects everywhere in the world, whether it's just avoiding that country and pipeline infrastructure becoming more expensive, or whether it's simply, migrant crises that are caused by these conflicts. Just to let everything go chaotic will have flashbacks from the US automatically. We can see that just from Venezuela, where effectively the US just put sanctions and some pretty heavy restrictions on Venezuelan goods. And all of a sudden, we had 8 million Venezuelans flee the country. Many of them, traveling towards the United States. And again, not bashing on migrants here, but it's just a cause and effect. And that's something that people don't tend to think about when they think about foreign aid and foreign policy.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, when it comes to a situation like that, like we can like focus on South America because like I wasn't really thinking they were gonna get to that, but it's still an important topic because I remember you covered the geopolitics of countries in South America actually, but like for example, some countries in South America are like we've had, let's just say, like, I'm just gonna call it for what it is. We've put our business into their business essentially, and it's caused yeah, that's to put it lightly essentially, and it's caused, like, this is like one of the reasons as to why so many people come up from that area. But places like El Salvador, however, you've got their president, you and I have talked about him already. He's basically just, instituted martial law where there's basically rounding up everybody. It doesn't matter. You could have like spit on the sidewalk and you're going to go to prison basically for it. I mean, it's crazy what he's doing. But I don't know what this really has to do with isolationism, but it's just like, is El Salvador kind of heading that direction though of like being isolationist, or are they just like, until they clean house essentially? Because like it seems like they got that country locked in tight essentially.
No, South Salvador is actually leaning more towards, making deeper ties with China. They have massive ties with the United States. The country is still very, very reliant on remittances coming back in from the United States to fund its economy. The Bitcoin thing didn't particularly work out very well. But the El Salvador situation, I see that a lot on social media as well. They're kind of, hey, why would this not work in the United States? Again, they've arrested, it's like 3% of the population, which effectively, when the last time I did the math, it's something like doubling the US prison population overnight, which again, that's an insane amount of prisoners to just arrest all at once. The other thing that people keep forgetting is that whilst, because of the geography of kind of Central America, all the other countries usually you have to go through those countries, except El Salvador. So when Bukele went really, really hard on his own people to the point where now you can just accuse your neighbor and they'll end up in jail.
Yep.
Now the drug cartels just look at it and go, oh, well, who cares? And they just move around it and they go through.
Just go to a different country, honestly.
They just go through another country, which again, that's perfectly fine. That strategy works. And again, I understand that the quandary that people in El Salvador have at the moment of, hey, look, we know we've given this dictatorial powers, but the streets are much safer than what they were. And I do understand that dilemma. but the United States doesn't have the option of being bypassed. The United States is the actual destination for most of these consumable drugs, which is the reality of this. So yeah, you're like, just because it fits just because it fits a duck doesn't mean it fits a horse. Is probably the best way to say that.
Absolutely. And the reason why I bring up issues like this though, and the reason because people just think, yeah, if we just shut ourselves off, the problem's just gonna sort itself out. People are gonna stop coming to this country because we're not gonna let anybody in, nobody out. They're talking about. I've heard people that are isolationists just thinking that we should just completely seal off the border, say like we just don't allow anybody in. It's like, okay, how exactly are you going to enforce something like that? I mean, that's just what I'm curious about. That, like, what exactly are you going to fix? Like, what's the end game for that? I mean, well, how? I mean,
so two things. One, the only real isolationist country that goes with that policy prescription is North Korea. Mm-hmm. And their economy is just a shambles. Mm-hmm. Everything costs way too much. Everything is just terribly produced. The other one being Cuba. And again, the United States has kept the Cuban economy pretty broken for a very long time by imposing, sanctions on them. Why would you want to impose sanctions on yourself? Which is effectively what isolationism is. It's putting sanctions on yourself. It's getting rid of that trade. It's getting rid of that ability to use consumables. I have no idea why this would even be a policy option. We can go through comparative advantage and the difference that makes. But yes, the only countries that actually use that policy prescription are Cuba and North Korea. And I don't know how much foreign policy people watch. Neither of them are economic powerhouses.
Yeah, but you'll always hear people say, oh, but over in North Korea, their streets are so clean. It's like, well, yeah, it's because nobody has a car. Only like 10 people have a car in North Korea and all the whole country, for crying out loud. Let alone the fact that,
their streets are so clean in the central district of Pyongyang. A lot of the areas in the rural places are quite dirty. I don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. But so in the video that I was talking about earlier with Owen Shroyer and Destiny, Owen Shroyer was talking about like how a lot of international companies have control of the ports. Is he right about that? Is he right that like they have control over the ports, or is it like a mutual thing? Like we have control of ports like in Beijing, and then they've got control of ports in our parts of the country. I mean, does he have a point, or is he just completely fucked up like a football bat, basically?
Again, I actually watched that whole video. It was very interesting to kind of watch. He's kind of right, but not really. I mean, there is true that foreign ownership of ports is actually quite a common thing. Ports are very, very expensive to do and would often require a lot of capital to do so. So a lot of the time, particularly if you want to, let's say, automate a port, that's going to cost millions and millions, billions of dollars to do. And for a while now, China's been the one that says, hey, I've got a bunch of capital floating around and I don't want to keep it in the Shanghai Stock Exchange. So I'm just going to invest it wherever I can. A port is a pretty good long-term investment most of the time. Does that mean that they can actually control what comes in and out of the port? Not really, no. I mean, ports usually are, not first come, first serve, but pretty close to first come, first serve. There are licenses, there are agreements. These are massive, massive multinational companies working out of these ports. If you are, let's say, working with DB World, which is a Dubai-based company, you are probably having containers coming in from, 100 countries every time you unload that port. Who owns the port makes very little difference. It's more, if it were China, that's one thing. If it were, Ronald McDonald, that would be another thing. It really doesn't matter that much on who owns the port. It's mostly just who capital puts it in. If someone develops a port, that's a little bit different. And again, this is kind of where a kernel of truth is blown up into something bigger. So if you look at something like the Chinese who have funded ports in Gwadar, places in Cambodia, places in Myanmar, yes, some of those ports technically could be retrofitted for naval operations. It's a possibility. I don't think they probably would, not anytime soon. But that's a little more scary. But what Owen was talking about with the United States ports and the the port strike workers is completely different. He's equating what is effectively, hey, we're looking for investors. Oh, here's some money because I have capital lying around and I don't want to keep it in China. To workers who are going, hey, we've watched the profits go up by 10 times and our pay hasn't gone up at all. We'd like some pay increase, please. I mean, there are two, completely different stories that somehow were merged into this one thought.
And I don't think he really understands like the story of like why they went on strike. But the thing is, fortunately, the strike only lasted like 2 days, if that. because they're able to come to a general consensus. From what I understand, some people are trying to give Ron DeSantis credit for that, but actually the people that gave credit was Pete Buttigieg, Secretary of Transportation. But he didn't brag about it, though. He just said, hey, I'm so glad that this came to a resolution. I was glad to see they came to a resolution because that was really threatening to, because working in logistics, I can tell you that if logistics stopped working for about 3 days, the entire country would come to a freeze. And people don't realize how vital, that's why it's important for us to make sure that we take care of employees and shit like that. But anyway, I'm digressing though. So I think we've kind of really hit on the isolationism, but let's get into the real meat and potatoes. Foreign aid. I see all the time on social media. I already kind of asked this question earlier. Why do we continue to give foreign aid to other countries? They always say things like, oh, foreign aid. Oh my God, we're giving foreign aid to this country. When did we get foreign aid from other countries? I mean, come on, we give aid to countries that have natural disasters. When did we get aid for natural disasters? I try to explain to them, but it's it's going in one ear and out the other. And it's absolute insanity. And I try to explain to them, listen, foreign aid is a different budget, all right? And guess who controls the budget? Guess who controls the purse of the economy? Congress. They're the ones that make these approvals, but nobody wants to listen to that shit, right? But you've explained to me what foreign aid is. So, in simplest terms, what is foreign aid and why is it important that we contribute foreign aid, essentially, in simplest terms?
I do find this foreign aid in the United States a very odd conversation because it's the largest recipient of US foreign aid is Israel by a long way. It's not even close. Yet the guys who are the most pro-Israel are the ones also talking about foreign aid, which again, very funny to me. Foreign aid again is a way of, either improving things for US businesses in the area or buying favors or frankly, just actually starting good relations. Because again, if you want to be at the table that is making the decision, you have to sometimes buy your way onto that table. If you are, if you look at what the US is actually spending, again, 0.2% of GDP, it bought them a massive amount of goodwill around the world. It's bought them a massive amount of favors. It allows them to have decisions. As a classic example, the US spent, a couple of $100 million in Tajikistan back during the war on terror. It was almost nothing. It was chump change to the United States. But when the war on terror happens and they need to effectively go and use bases or hey, we need an emergency airstrip that we can use when we need to, yes, the conversation can happen because the relations are already there. They're already pre-established. People already have a somewhat positive opinion. And again, a lot of foreign aid is very cheap to do and actually has great effects. It's insane to me. You go places like Georgia, places, Ukraine's obviously a different example, but Georgia, Tajikistan is another one, Armenia as well, where you see USAID stickers on bins. And that's just such a little thing that, it probably costs the US $10 to do. But now there's probably thousands of people saying, hey, the US is here and the US is supporting this country. That's a huge amount of goodwill to be buying for a very little amount of money. And people go, okay, well, we could be spending that money on homeless veterans or whatever the word of the day is. But it's buying the conversations and it's getting the US at the table. So when things happen and things go wrong, they can have massive blowbacks in the US economy. They can buffer them. When the US, let's say, wants to talk to other countries about surging their oil price or surging their oil production, so it counteracts when Saudi Arabia or Russia try to jack up the price of the United States without actually investing and keeping good relations. Why would those countries help the United States? By helping them, the US can effectively change the conversation, can reset things and actually call favors in without having to use the stick all the time. And all of this for 0.2% of GDP, which is, again, that's a very small amount of money in the grand scheme of things. I believe we would have spent far more on that on billionaire tax cuts.
I believe one time you gave me an example. You considered foreign aid as an insurance policy, right? And I think you gave me I wasn't sure if it was a hypothetical, but say for example, Australia gave foreign aid to Malaysia, right? And then one day Australia says, nope, sorry, you don't get any more aid right now. Malaysia's then realized that they're just right up. So now they got to find another sugar daddy. Along comes China. But what does China want in return for a little bit of foreign aid? They want a little bit of real estate. Why? because they want to be able to expand in the event like, hey, if we want to invade this country, we want to have like a port city to go into, and Malaysia is great real estate for kind of get into. Is that kind of like the best way to describe it as well? Like it's like an insurance policy essentially?
Insurance policy is a decent way to put it, but I had this conversation with an MP not long ago, talking about with a member of parliament,
Okay.
what you guys are called congressman.
Okay.
And talking about some of these Pacific Islands nations that Australia gives a little bit of money to. It's a couple $100 million, but it keeps a good relations, and we work with these guys, and they make sure they keep on our good books. And having the simple conversation with them and going, okay, yeah, on year one we'll save $250 million. Great. Year two we'll save $250 million. Great. Then China will come in and they will demand things that we won't have to demand. Like when China comes in, they're going to probably demand that the press is run by China, which is not great for us. The telecommunication systems are going to be run by China, which means we can't use them as substations. And more importantly, if the Chinese put, let's say missile sites on these areas, we now have to bring millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars of missile defense to counter that. This is a very cheap investment to stop that happening. And yes, people will go, oh, but I can get my 200 million now. We're not realizing that, okay, we're going to have to spend, $8 billion to solve this problem in a few years. That's what foreign aid is partly about. It's also mostly about helping your business and helping commerce in these places. Again, the largest recipient of foreign aid, Australian foreign aid a few years ago was Australia, mostly helping Australian companies operate more efficiently in some of these countries around the globe. The US is notorious for it as well. They'll build things like really, really nice highways between the base and the airport. Foreign aid is we think about it as kind of rice and food and that kind of stuff. It's quite often roads, rail, or building infrastructure that will either A, make sure we have good reputation in the area and we can have those conversations, and B, enough money that if it's in some cases, hey, behave yourself, we're going to keep giving you $200 million a year, but the moment you misbehave or you let China in or you do whatever you want to do, we'll take that $200 million away. Now you might go, oh well, why are we giving $200 million? Because it's going to cost us billions to get China out once they're in. Again, this is pretty well targeted spending in most cases.
Yeah. And I'm kind of curious because China's been expanding its influence, especially in continents like Africa. If I'm not mistaken, like they're even like building I think they built an airport in a country. I can't remember, was it Uganda or something like that? Lots of China's built most airports at the moment. Okay. And people are like, well, why should we be concerned about that? And it's real estate that they basically have. It's an agreement they have with another country, which means they can spread what? Influence into that region. And people are like, well, wait a second, why is that such a big deal? It's like, well, think about it, right? We just kind of covered. It's like, why is this such a big deal, essentially? It's sort of like we give foreign aid to countries in Europe, right? And what else do we have like in some parts of Europe? We have military bases there, right? And why is that important? Well, just in the event that, like, say, for example, if Russia starts to get a little froggy and they want to go attack a NATO ally, I'm not saying they would, but if that in case was to happen, we could basically be like, I wouldn't say a speed bump, but we could because the quickest deploying force right now is the 82nd Airborne. Everybody knows this. That's their main purpose. And they could be anywhere within 72 hours. But you still need to make sure that there's somebody there to basically prevent the advance of an invading force. And it's important for us to maintain this foreign aid, this foreign influence that we basically have. And it's why it's important for us to maintain this relationship. That's why, like, I try to tell people, it's like, listen, if we start cutting ourselves off from the rest of the world, it doesn't mean our problems are going to go away. They're actually going to expand exponentially. Because I like to bring the fact that if, I look at the situation like in Ukraine and Russia, it's kind of like where people like just don't really understand like why this is important. If Biden did nothing, right? If we said we're going to stay out of this one, we're not going to contribute anything to this, and then says, listen, UN, NATO, don't contribute anything to this. And Ukraine basically gets boat raced across the board, and it ends up getting conquered. I don't think Putin was going to stop there, and let alone the fact that everyone's going to say, oh my God, look what happened. They invaded and Biden did nothing. But Biden did something, and then we actually brought 2 more countries into NATO, And now Russia is bleeding resources. They basically took a gamble, and now they're paying for it, essentially. This is why relations like this are important, and I don't think people really understand this. I mean, is that kind of a good assessment?
I think a more tangible assessment, because there's a lot of different whats and ands and ifs there. You know, a classic case, if you really want to look at something that's, you know, today obvious, you know, if you take a country like the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, that is one of the cheapest sources of copper anywhere in the world, and copper, lithium, a few great minerals that are really needed for the next kind of EV transition, needed for a whole bunch of different things. Now, you're right. Now the US gives some money. China's probably the bigger partner in the country. If the US was, let's say, go, no more money for the DRC, we're pulling back, we're done, we're not doing it anymore, what incentive does Kinshasa have to not just say, okay, well, China calls the shots now? And China goes, okay, we're the only ones who have license to operate here now. And frankly, if China's the only one paying the bills, then Kinshasa would probably say yes to that option. And if that happens, now you have effectively copper coming out of the ground where China can undercut us at every point. So if you want to start a battery shop, if you want to start all of these things, you're now going into this market with China undercutting you at every single point, making you uncompetitive in the international market. You're saving effectively, you know, a couple of $100 million, bits and pieces, little chump change here and there. But you're now giving China complete control of an industry that they can jack up the price and pass it on to the American consumer. Again, this is why it's very important to make sure we're at the table, because if we're not at the table, then other people will make the rules that then we have to follow. I cannot stress that enough on how important it is that the US should be, if they want to be making, you know, things better for the United States, they should be at the table making decisions for the United States.
Which is so funny because, you know, Secretary Buttigieg actually went before Congress, and when they were talking about, you know, EVs and cars and stuff like that, he was very specific talking about, is like, listen, either we control the market, either we build these cars, or China will. And people don't understand like how vital that really is, because whether people realize it or not, I mean, listen, I don't have an EV at this point. I probably won't have one for quite some time because, you know, we've got horses. But little in fact, I live on a dirt road and I live in the country, so I don't really have much of a use for a car right now. I don't really have a place to plug in for an EV, essentially. But that doesn't mean I won't buy one eventually, because these are the vehicles of the future. Yes, I get it. EVs, they catch on fire, they burn, you know, stuff like that, you know, so do gas cars. It's there's no perfect scenario to it. But the thing is, like, the technology is there. It's going to get better. It's going to get progressively better. And someday, not in the near future, maybe gas cars are going to get slowly but surely phased out. Maybe in the next 100 years. I don't know. I can't see the future. But that market is coming. And people don't realize that. They think we're just out here to give the earth a hug. No, this is the way of the future. There are countries out there that are developing, like, alternative means of energy consumption and means of cars to travel. And what does that require? Copper, lithium, all these other rare earth minerals. I mean, you've covered rare earth minerals pretty significantly too.
Yeah, again, EVs aren't for everyone. Again, I think a lot of people kind of, I live in a rural farm and I don't need EVs. Yeah, that's perfectly reasonable. For the same reason you have horses. I live in the city. I probably have no need for horses here. They're designed to take what the majority of consumer trips are, which are, you know, people traveling less than 10 kilometers from their house to work, and they come home after work. That's what the majority of people's car trips are. And it's where the majority of people who actually have cars are. The United States is a very car-heavy, car-centric place compared to most.
Yeah.
We don't expect everyone to transition to EVs. And there is a few tipping points we need to hit. So one of them is we need to solve some of the bottlenecks in the production chain. The other one is to get the new price below the sort of 30,000 US mark, because the 30,000 US mark means we actually get this used price down to around the 7,000 US mark. And that's about the price where consumers go, yeah, okay, it makes financial sense. It's not extra to go, you know, buy that versus a combustion engine. You're also seeing a world where the price of fuel is only going up, but the price of energy is going down. I know people's energy bills seem like they're going higher, but a lot of that is actually because the energy companies are either gouging or desperate to just repair infrastructure that was built in the 1950s and 60s. If the energy price keeps going down, particularly with the use of renewables, because frankly, if you're using solar, there's very little input cost at that point. You're now going to have the price of EVs go down, and that will eventually come in and become a much larger and larger section of the market. And yes, if the US doesn't want to make EVs, China is going to make EVs. Really, we're already seeing, particularly in the European market, where Chinese cars are only being held back because of effectively massive restrictions placed on by the EU government. Even then, they're barely holding on now. Russia has just opened the market as well to Chinese, particularly Chinese EVs and Chinese very, very cheap cars. And that's having huge problems through that market as well. This is again, a conversation the US needs to be in, and a production chain the US should be investing in. If we are moving away from combustion vehicles eventually, and again, the economics just says it's going to get that point. Right now, yes, it is a bit of a choice, but once EVs start becoming cheaper than combustion engines, the majority of people are going to move across. Mm-hmm. It's just the simple way of it. If a family can save $4,000 a year by moving to an EV, they're not going to, what would stop them doing so? This is something that is coming whether the United States wants it or not. It may not be soon, and it may not be for everyone, but for the same reason that people still have horses. We didn't get rid of all our horses when we made combustion engines.
Exactly. Anyway, I know that was kind of like a bit of I know we kind of like carried off into a different topic, but it is actually all kind of tied together. But, so when it comes down to contributing foreign aid, like China is like we just covered, is trying to contribute more foreign aid. They're trying to get more real estate in areas. Is it because of rare earth minerals and stuff like that, like in the Congo essentially, or is there other reasons for that essentially?
Again, China's doing their outreach for a whole bunch of reasons. Part of it is, because they want to effectively build inroads into the market. People don't really trust Chinese companies quite often. They want to effectively, be able to, pay some foreign aid, form some good relations, and then go to the government and say, hey, we want to buy a mine here. Can we do it? And they say, yep, no problem. You can do that. Part of it is also just that China wants markets to sell stuff to. The massive problem that China has right now is that it exports a whole bunch of stuff to the Western world, but it's desperate to try and export more. It wants more people consuming its stuff. How can you do that if you don't have relations or markets to consume? We're already seeing effectively that all the Western markets are drowned with Chinese materials and consumables, which are starting to shrink because people are trying to decouple a little bit back from China. So they're trying to form relations with a lot of Africa, a lot of South Asia, South America as well, trying to sell consumables to them and form markets that will buy Chinese goods. Because again, as any business owner will tell you, if I can sell, stuff to my local area, that's great. But if I can sell local area and to somewhere else as well, I'm now just making more money, which means I pay my staff more, which means a whole bunch of different things in the economy. This is pretty simple stuff. If I was to walk up to your next door neighbor, Alex, and say, would you like to buy this hot dog I made? They probably, think I'm a bit of a weirdo. But if I came to your door and said, hey, do you want to buy this hot dog? Yeah, oh, Michael, I know you. I trust you. Sounds good. Come on in. Yes, I'll buy your hot dog. It's super weird. Why are you in the United States at the moment? But again, just gives you an idea of why you would, keep these good relations with these countries to make sure that you can sell into the consumer market. And then when there are discussions about trade and tariffs and all these kind of fun bits, those countries aren't going to go out of their way to hurt you because they know you're a good person. They know you're there to help, and they know that you can provide assistance. One of the biggest things I've always lobbied for, and I've pushed with, and I've got legislation through, I've worked on policy committees that got it done over here, are things like disaster relief packages that, it doesn't cost Australia a lot of money when a tsunami comes in and hurts a little Pacific Island nation, for us to go send a couple of planes out there full of soldiers and effectively give them medicine and some food and some rice and some radios and just help them get through those first couple of days. All in all, doesn't actually cost us that much, but there is something amazing and something that just sticks in people's mind about when the disaster came. There was an Australian soldier there with, Australian armbands helping you and giving you food, power, water, and electricity. That's just, I could spend $1 billion in advertising and I couldn't buy that amount of PR. And that's the beauty of where foreign aid can be. It's often targeted, it hits the right places, and it buys stuff that advertising just can't. I mean, anyone in the United States in election years knows advertising won't change your mind like a giant big thing like, Australians rocking up with rice in the middle of a disaster will.
Absolutely. And I find that like great. I didn't really want to like go on this topic, but you mentioned tariffs, right?
Mm-hmm.
People I don't think really have any idea, especially a certain person that's running for president that likes to wear orange makeup. He has no idea. Like even I barely know what tariffs are, basically. So do you think he kind of like weigh in as like when he's talking about like raising the price of like putting big old tariffs on all these different countries? Like who does that actually hurt? Does it hurt the consumer or does it hurt the person that's sending us the product?
The American consumer is the one who pays for tariffs. It's again a bonkers thing to do. And again, a lot of people. So we'll take you through what a tariff is, and we'll put the big argument that keeps coming up on this one. A tariff is effectively, let's say, if I want to buy a loaf of bread from France, if I put a tariff of 20% on, even if the French price was, let's say, a dollar, and the American price was $1.10, by putting that tariff on, it means that by the time I actually get to the shelf, it's $1.20 from the French and $1.10 from the Americans. So people go, well, the Americans are now cheaper. I'll buy the American good. That's the theory behind tariffs. In practice, though, what actually happens is either A, the other markets buy up, and B, there's shortages in the American market, and C, people just pay more for stuff. Because again, that bread example only works when there's an American example ready to go. If you, let's say, take a microwave as a sake of the argument, if I'm just going to slap a 20% increase on that price, okay, my microwaves just became 20% more, which makes it, or even if you were to create them. So let's say China, can make a microwave for $10. By the time, even if you were to go pay the millions of dollars, which companies aren't going to do, they're just going to wait it out, and put a microwave on the consumer shelf, it's going to be probably, take the argument $40, $50, which means they're not going to get bought anyway. So now effectively the price has just gone up to import this microwave and there's no American product there to replace it. So you've just effectively supercharged the inflation problem for nothing. You don't get much back from this at all. On top of that, the shortages will cause people to effectively go, okay, rather than, like the American car industry at the moment, where you build parts of it in Mexico and you build parts of it in the United States, they go, this is just too expensive to do in the United States. We just had all of our costs go up by 20%. Let's just build the whole thing in Mexico because there's tariffs now. It's too much. You've, again, just taken away a bunch of American jobs there as well. The pushback that I always see on this is, oh, yes, but Trump put tariffs on steel and, that worked. Steel was actually probably more because a lot of steel mills are in very, very marginal districts. And the steel workers have a pretty powerful union, so it was very happy to keep them on side. And yes, it probably did cost the American economy a little bit, but Biden kept him in, for probably similar political reasons. But steel's also a good that can be made into a whole bunch of different things and has some national security implications as well. When you have something like bread, that example makes sense. If the bread can be made and it's about the right price, yeah, perfect, fine. Steel makes sense because it's a very expensive good to ship as well. Perfectly reasonable. Then when you get to 20% tariffs on everything, microwaves, electronics, consumables, that is the horrifying idea where you're just adding a 20% cost overnight. And again, why are no other countries doing this? It should be the question.
Yep. And just like a little interesting factoid, I actually found out that when my wife and I bought our but when we first got into our apartment, we wanted, because like we lived in an RV park by choice, we had to get used quarters to do our laundry. It's like $1.25 for wash, $1.25 for dry. That added up after a while. Well, anyway, long story short, it was 2019 and we finally got into an apartment, so we needed to get laundry machines. Come to find out that laundry machines, because of Trump's tariffs, actually cost about $150 more. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. Found out that it was because of these tariffs, let alone the fact that Trump's tariffs actually also affected farmers. People don't realize this. Like, they actually had to do an entire bailout for farmers because, what was it? Soybeans, I think it was, actually hurt them when we were doing business with China. So, like, this concept of trade wars is just, like, here's the thing. Economy is not my strong suit, but, like, when I looked into it, like, the proof was in the pudding. But, again, no way.
Again, when I was just talking that, I was talking about just tariffs by themselves are a terrible idea. And again, that doesn't even account for the obvious response that is going to happen, which is that other countries will tariff the United States, which is just going to draw people away from the United States. Again, so any business in the United States who sells things on the international market is just made it way more difficult for themselves. You look at, Brexit, you look at all that's been there's been a basket case for the United Kingdom. And instead of bringing jobs back, it just saw so many businesses go, the UK is not worth the headache that this market is now. We're just going to put our headquarters in Brussels or in France or in Germany or in Spain. We're not going to bother with Britain anymore. Again, you're exactly right with the washing machines. It costs you more because there isn't a replacement good. And that's where people don't think about the next step, which is, okay, is there going to be an American product to replace that? Steel, yep, it's doable. Anything that requires a lot of labor or requires massive amount of different inputs, you've just exponentially increased the price.
And what I think people don't even realize, right? If people think, oh, well, we can just build one of these factories. Do you have any idea how long that takes? Any idea how long? Because, here's things first, okay? I don't know a lot about this, but I can tell you this. Because I deliver infrastructure products to houses that are getting built and stuff, right? First things first, you got to make sure you have the real estate. Then you got to clear the real estate. Once you clear the real estate, you got to make sure that you get the foundation put in place. That takes a very, very long time. And if you're talking about building a 9,000 square foot warehouse manufacturing facility, that's going to take a great deal of time because you got to make sure you have the equipment. You got to make sure that you have the workers. You got to make sure that they are working good hours. You got to make sure that they have safety requirements. You've got OSHA regulations. That's going to take time to make sure all this goes through. It's not going to get done within a reasonable amount of time. Why? Because especially if it's a facility like the CHIPS Act is a great example. People wondering, why aren't the factories being built? Well, they are being built, but the thing is there's a lot of red tape to go through to make sure they're built in key identifiable locations, essentially, right? So you're looking at you're looking at about a year.
I was going to say, it's way more than a year.
More than a year, maybe even but.
I'll just pitch you on this for a second. Think about this for let's take our microwave as an example. Let's say Trump goes way further with this and says 150% tariff that actually makes it, American microwave costs $50. Now the Chinese microwave also costs $50. If you're an investor and I come to you and goes, let's start a microwave factory because Trump put these tariffs in. You need to put millions of dollars out of money to start the microwave factory, to get the production chain, to secure your inputs, to train up your labor force, to get everything going. And then you might get to the market and you might be competitive with China, to which it probably won't be. Also, while your economy is absolutely screaming, and we know Trump will probably, I would imagine him, if this gets as bad as it's probably going to get, would get rid of the tariffs before just riding it out to the end. So why would any investor want to put millions of dollars in when the moment these tariffs would come off, their business is nowhere near competitive? Because if the tariffs come off, now they're smelling microwaves at $50 that are already in the market at 10. No investor would put their money in for this. So it's not going to get solved on that end.
Especially considering the fact that, if you've got all these other microwaves that are being built by, China, Taiwan, what have you and stuff, and then you try to build a brand new microwave, nobody knows this product. How do they know that this thing's not going to explode, essentially? Hey, look at that. I know that product. I'm going to use that product. I'm going to keep using that product. Why? Because I know it works. I know and I got reviews, all this. This brand new one, well, it seems kind of like a silly comparison, but it's true, though. And, it's just, and I feel like this all does kind of, in a way, tie together. It's just why would you switch to another system if you've already got something good going on, essentially? Why should you switch? We can get called sugar daddy or something like that, but it's just why would you want to give something like that up? Because you know that you've already got a good thing going on, but yet you want to change this up. I still want to hear a reason as to why, but the only excuse is because, it's because we got to take care of our issues back at home. Okay, well, that's a different kind of funding. Again, that's controlled by Congress. And I remember certain people flipping out about the $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill. And there's well, where's all these infrastructure projects? Well, I see them all the time. I see them on the road every single day. Well, in fact, there's over 60,000 projects being done. But these things take time. But people don't understand these things. I would much rather, and we're still way behind. We don't have a high-speed rail system in this country. but yet, you say you want to invest in our country, but yet you're upset about us investing in our country. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, this is, there's two parts of this story. The infrastructure stuff is some of the best spending you can do, because not only does it hire a bunch of the workers that you really do need to get jobs for, construction workers, guys, who are feeding the construction workers, the local bars, those kind of guys. When you just build money and put a highway there, you're actually employing a lot of people in that area.
Yep.
Two, it also makes things cheaper to operate. So one of the major parts of the Biden infrastructure program has been things like internet, which has allowed a lot of these very rural, very red state businesses to be able to sell into other places, which is increasing their output, which is increasing the amount they can make, which is increasing their take-home pay. Infrastructure also just, it's a good thing to usually invest in. It makes lives better, it improves roads, it improves rail. It is the classic go-to, 101 economics that you want to be spending on if you want to inject money into the economy rather than just throwing it out the window. Mm-hmm. When it comes to the, why do people want to do tariffs? Why do people want to, go down this road? I do kind of get it. Right now, the majority of the American economy isn't working for a lot of people. They are, a lot of the older, unskilled workforce is finding it harder to compete. And they look back at a time and go, oh, well, we can just go back to that. Not really. You would have to either revert the entire world back to that system, because everybody is enjoying that at the moment, which you're not going to do. Or B, you're looking at the wrong end of the stick. Again, you look at one of my favorite graphs, one of my favorite subreddits used to exist was graphs where you can tell Reagan was president. And you watch this effectively, what used to happen is the amount of pay and the amount of output was roughly very correlatory the whole way until about 1983, where pay increases slightly, but corporate profits goes like this. Mm-hmm. And that's what the problem has been, is we've made massive output increases. The US is producing more than it has ever produced before for a whole bunch of industries. And yet less people are being employed, less people are being trained, less people are doing stuff. And that's the problem. How other countries are solving this, for instance, one of the major policies of the current Australian government was to go, okay, we understand this, and a lot of these industries aren't going to come back, because even if we were to pump $10 billion into building a new car factory, we're not going to be competitive on the international market due to Australian wages. So instead, we're going to make training much more accessible, make training free, get everyone reskilled to things that you need to be doing, and make it as easy as possible. We will hold your hand. We will pay you to get trained and retrained to do other things. Because yes, you may not be able to be, in the ground coal worker, not because, the government came and hate you. It's because coal is not economically competitive anymore. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter how much people kick and scream, it's becoming less economically competitive. And these are not problems that can be solved. If the price is going down, then why would anyone invest more into this? Yep. People are worried about that issue. I get that it's frustrating and it seems like it's an easy fix when you go, oh, well, we'll just tariff, things become more expensive and more jobs will be hired here. No, things actually get better with things like building out port infrastructure, building out rail, building out roads, so that your metal shop factory in the middle of, Tennessee, for instance, can actually get their stuff to port, because they might be competitive on the international market at that point. You might not sell more in the United States, but you'll sell more United States goods elsewhere. Mm-hmm. This is the actual solution to the problem, and yet it's not quite understood by, I think, a lot of people today.
And I really do think that a lot of that has to do with the American education system. Like, a lot of the stuff, it's kind of not really harped upon. But then again, I don't know, like, if they're teaching this kind of stuff in high school, but I just don't know if it's emphasized enough, because a lot of people don't really do their own individual research on topics like these. Like, I try to keep myself as very well informed as possible. And while people say, oh my God, we're sending money to this area. Yeah, okay, I get it. You're upset about it, but there is a reason for it. But once again, it's just kind of like go in one ear, out the other. It's like, why should I care? Why should I care? It's like, we got our own problems here. Yeah, I know we got our own problems here, but you can't get mad if we try to fix our problems here, but then get mad, and then wonder why these things aren't getting done sooner. Like, so people are talking about like why broadband isn't being put in rural areas. Again, this takes time. It doesn't get done overnight. It's not like you can just, would you rather get done right, or would you rather get done quickly? Is like my outlook on things. But It's just,
Broadband's a really, really interesting one as well. Broadband has a huge amount of other problems, but it's incredibly expensive for what the government is spending so much money to get broadband out to the rural areas. Because whilst in, let's say, the city, whilst in New York City, you can run, let's say, I don't know, a couple hundred meters of copper, and there will be enough people using that copper to make a huge profit on it. There's a huge amount of internet users all using that copper because it's a real dense area.
Yep.
When it's rural, if you want to go from one farmstead to the other farmstead, you might have to make, kilometers of copper for one customer. So they can't use profit. If it was completely free market like people are calling for, then no one in the rural areas would ever actually have internet.
Yeah.
Because it actually costs the government to do that, because the government has gone, we're not going to leave these people behind. We're not going to let them just suffer in the free market. We're going to spend government money to make sure they have access to the internet, because we know that is a massive game changer for education, for business, for commerce, for everything, out of their own pockets. And yes, it's expensive, and yes, it takes time. But the people complaining about it are the same people who are being spent millions of dollars more because they aren't a profitable market. You can't rely on the free market to get copper, internet run out to these places.
Yeah, because all the internet options out here, and I know, and we'll be getting ready to wrap up here shortly. Like, all the internet places out here are terrible. It is absolutely atrociously bad. Like the internet that I had when we first moved out here was DSL. That's how bad it was. Like back in the day, DSL was amazing, but now it's absolutely atrociously bad. But that's the best they can do, especially for areas like this. Now, the funny part is that, now we use Starlink. Yes, that Starlink. Yeah, I get it. I'm not a fan of Elon Musk either, but it's giving me the internet that I need. Until we get broadband in here, this is what's going to have to do. But, like, my whole point is like, infrastructure is one of my favorite topics, aside from, like, other things. But it's just, I really do think that people need to understand that projects like these take time. But just because you're upset, and people can be upset about, like, oh my God, we're taking care of other countries that don't give a shit about us, but we got all these other issues back home. Okay, well, that's something you can write your congressman or congresswoman about. But the process we have right now are in place for a reason, and they have fared us very, very well. But I just think I think like one of the main sources, and I hate to say this because I use it all the time, is social media. Social media has really made us dumber as a whole, because people are just, it's just like, I wouldn't say like boy who cried wolf, but it's like, what's a good analogy for this? It's just, they see the problem, but they don't really give out a solution to this problem. They just think, oh yeah, well, just stop giving foreign aid and the problems will go away, and then we'll be able to sort ourselves out. Let's take care of our country first, and then we can take care of other countries next. It's like, well, by then it's too late then, because again, like I'm pretty sure, I don't know if like any European country we give foreign aid to is just going to reach out to like, China right away, but like they might reach out to somebody, and then when we try to come back to them, say, hey, you want some money back? It's like, nah, we're good right now.
Again, a lot of the foreign aid that we give to Europe is very different to the foreign aid we give to other countries. When Australia gives foreign aid to a Pacific Island nation, it's things like making sure they have a news station that functions independently, making sure that, the water functions, the power functions, they have telecommunication infrastructure. When we're giving foreign aid to, sake of the argument, I'd actually Australia didn't give any foreign aid to most European nations, but if we were, it would probably be things like, hey, we're going to give you grants at a university because you're doing similar research that Australia is doing, and we would love you to do an exchange with Australian students. Again, foreign aid can be almost anything. And again, the next time you hear someone ask, we should cut foreign aid budget, you go, fantastic, are we defunding Israel? Because again, they're the largest recipient of US foreign aid. And again, it's the same exact people who call for the end of foreign aid are also calling for more funding for Israel. So again, if you don't like Israel, then that's a whole different conversation. But again, I just find it funny that it's the same people calling for both.
Yeah. Again, I just think, like, once again, it's social media. People are just like making these comments without doing any research about these topics. And, I used to be guilty of this too, but now I try to keep myself as well informed as possible about this. But like, if you were just like came across somebody that just said, well, listen, I don't care anymore. I don't want to contribute to this stuff anymore. My tax dollars, I don't want my tax dollars to go towards like some conflict that I don't want to take care of or something like that. Like this is bullshit. I don't want to keep giving money, stuff like this. I don't care anymore. Like, what would be your answer to that, essentially? Okay, take Israel out of the equation. Let's say Israel's not part of the equation. Like, what would be your answer to them, essentially?
There is one comic strip that has had more impact on my way of thinking than any other in the world. And it's from a few years ago, and it's this guy at a laptop going, look, honey, I discovered something that all the world's scientists and economists missed. And that absolutely just hits the spot of what I'm talking about here, where generally my rule of thumb is if all the smart people seem to be doing something, maybe they know something I don't. And again, I'm in a very privileged position that, because of the show and a few other things, that when I don't understand something, I can call someone and go, hey, I know you're an economist at this university. Can you jump on a call with me for 20 minutes? Because I have to figure out, I don't know how this works. And they'll sit down and go and explain it to me. And I know not everyone has access to that. Mm-hmm. But we also have amazing amount of great content on YouTube, online, of really gifted people who are just, experts in that field, giving pretty good explanations of these problems. We live in an age where you can look up things pretty easily. And I understand that it often just feels easier to you see the meme and you just go, okay, that's what it is. But if you see a meme and it seems like a terrible, terrible decision, people don't tend to make terrible decisions for no reason. Yes, sometimes it's corruption, sometimes it's problems. But if every country's doing it, that's usually a sign that, okay, there might be something behind this. Mm-hmm. If one country will, if North Korea and Cuba, not by their choice, by the way, are the only countries doing something, maybe not a great idea. Generally, my rule of thumb is if it tends to start appearing in, your Swedish and Nordic countries or European countries, that's usually going to be a pretty good social program. If it appears in North Korea, not really. But yes, I do understand that social media just makes it much easier. People don't have the time to sit there and spend 30 minutes listening to a lecture about, how tariffs work. I get that. That's fine. But just as a rule of thumb, if all the smart people are doing one thing, you do, they probably might know something you don't. And that's my philosophy and everything is I don't know. I'm not a smart person at all. I just listen to a lot of smart people and go, okay, cool, fantastic. Thank you for explaining that to me, because that it didn't make sense beforehand.
It's kind of like that picture that I see of an entire crowd of people, and you get that one guy that says, yes, you are all wrong. What? Like, I see that all the time. Like, anytime I ask people, it's like, okay, so what's your source? It's like, well, I do my own research. It's like, okay, so what are your sources? Oh, well, I just do my own independent sources research. It's okay, well, I got this source, I got this source, I got this source, this source. I got these people, they specialize in this region. You're telling me that they are wrong? Yes, they are wrong. Okay, based upon what? Oh, well, just because, I read something. I was like, read something from whom? It's just, it's mind-boggling to me. I mean, the world is a very complex place, but for some reason, it's just, the simplest answer just doesn't satisfy people. Sometimes, and like, some people don't like it when you have to explain things in detail. Like, man, you didn't have to write a book. It's like, well, this is a very complex issue. It's not like I can't answer it so simplistic. There's a reason as to why we do these things. And, I'm not a smart guy either. I'm willing to admit that as well. But I try to pride myself on actually, when I need a geopolitics question, I come and ask you. And if you don't know the answer, it's like, well, I'll get back to you on that. It's just, that's the best part of learning. Like, knowledge is knowing that you don't know everything. That's like the best thing I can come up with, is knowing that you don't know everything is the best way to put about it.
100%. And it's why, on the Redline team, we've made sure to not just have a bunch of poli-sci guys. Mm-hmm. We've got finance guys and cybersecurity guys and, defense guys and economists and all these different professions, because people are going to have different abilities and different ways of reading stuff. Things like, particularly during the pandemic, I'm not medically trained. I'm not very good at reading medical studies. I understand the terms, I understand some of it, but generally I had to go talk to guys who are in the medical field and go, hey, am I reading this right? And they go, yeah, you're almost there, but this word here in the context would mean this. I go, okay, why did no one explain that to me? That completely changes what I'm looking at here. And again, people shouldn't be expected to know everything, but you can always ask. And what, again, boggles my mind is we live in this amazing time where there is a Library of Alexandria out there. And also just professors are accessible. I'm always genuinely shocked every time I just email an author of a book or an author of a study and say, hey, just read your study. I don't understand this. And then within 2 days, you get this like essay back because people like talking about their specialty subject. My wife is sick of hearing me talk about Central Asian, defense tactics. But when people message me about that, I tend to love to talk about it. So yeah, we live in an amazing time. I get that it is harder to do and people have not as much time on their plates, but you can always be better. And if you think, you know everything, yeah, you don't.
Exactly.
Again, the smartest people I ever know and I ever meet always give me answers which are, from what we understand, this is the answer. And if they don't know the answer, all the smartest people I know will usually get back to me with let me get back to you in 48 hours with the answer to that. I'm pretty sure it's this. Here's what I'd imagine it would be. Let me double confirm that with you. And that's a great answer. It's not satisfying, but it's a great answer. And they usually get back to me with a fact-checked, worked on, really lengthy piece.
Oh, not a fact check. Oh my God, not a fact check. Oh geez, the dreaded fact check.
I don't know why how did that become a bad word in politics these days? That boggles my mind.
I really wish I'd answered that. So anyway, so I gotta get ready to go to bed soon. So Michael, thank you so much for spending this hour talk with me on these two issues. And I always appreciate your time, and I always appreciate the conversations we have because I feel like I always learn something from them.
Again, it's an absolute pleasure to have be on again. Sorry, I'm so rambly today. I have a sick child, so I've been. This is the very end of an all-nighter for me, so it's been a very long day. But nothing I like more than after being awake for 36 hours is talking about economics and tariffs. It's I'm one of the only people who actually enjoy that.
Yep. Well, again, I always appreciate your time because, like, I know you've got a very, very big schedule. Being a geopolitics expert, the world is always on fire, so there's always something to talk about regarding that. But you and I are always going to stay in contact. Like, hey, what do you tell about this situation? So, but yeah. Anyway, we're probably going to be in contact with the election, regardless of who wins or loses. You and I will be in contact, and for better or for worse. So,
of course, it's gonna be a very odd couple of days. So,
very, very
heaven help whatever happens.
So anyway, but be sure to check out Michael just every 2 weeks, or as they say, every fortnight. They just did a recent episode talking about Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the next episode will be coming out what day?
Oh, actually, I think we're betting on a meeting I have this afternoon. Actually, we'll either release it next week or the week after, because we're doing the next part of our Armed Forces of Central Asia series. So.
All right.
We're tying in a few things and trying to work around my insane schedule at the moment is a bit of a pain for everyone. So
yep, absolutely.
I apologize to the rest of the team.
Yep, absolutely. But yeah, I left a link in the description below. Just go give it a click and give it a listen. You can also find him on TikTok as well. You can find him on social media, on Twitter. That description is also in the description below. So Michael, once again, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.